Welcome to episode 3, God versus God, our first season Greco-Roman style. Andrew is with me.
Hey.
Hello. So we've heard in episode 1, we heard Dionysus take on Mars. In our last episode, Demeter squared off against Cupid. So this episode, we're hoping third time is the charm, and best of all. And Andrew, I hadn't told you this, but some listener response has already started to filter in. We've already gotten some comments from listeners. One, and I'm quoting here, one listener said, I immediately downloaded the pilot and left a 5-star review. Then I actually listened to it. I didn't read the rest of that. I'm sure it was glowing, but that's where I moved to other things. Also heard a few terms bandied about. Hilarious was one, which is nice. Informative also. And way, way too long. Now, I do take issue with that third one. I respectfully disagree. We're covering a lot of ground here, and we're keeping it so far to these brisk 90-minute time frames. So clearly this person has very valuable time, yet not too much time to type the word way twice. Way too long. So we'll take that with a grain of salt.
We'll wait till they hear about the new Batman movie.
That's exactly right. Yeah, hope you got a comfortable chair. Well, folks, you know the rules at this point. If you are new to the game, a quick recap. Each episode, Andrew and I audition 2 ancient gods to determine which of them might be the best suited to come out of retirement to save us from our current troubled times today. Each of us will review one of these gods, and then we'll compare them against 5 categories. The winner of the episode gets the golden apple for the episode, leading up to the season finale, where the ultimate victor will take away the golden goat to help us decide who will come back off the bench to save us from our troubled times. Yes. So once again, we have let the fates decide. We have used our random god generator, and we've taken 2 pretty good ones this week. I'm going to talk about Apollo, the god of prophecy, and much, much more.
Right.
And Andrew's going to cover Vulcan, the god of fire and the forge. So
that's correct.
It's marquee matchup. 2 Olympians, 2 of the original 12, a couple of heavyweights. So
yeah. When we first did this, I sort of acted like, oh, this is a big reveal, but then I didn't think about this is the name of the actual episode.
But they've actually clicked on a button that says that right there. So the spoilers are long gone. That's right.
They know what's going on.
No big reveal.
No.
Well, as always, so that we hit that crisp 90-minute time frame, let's jump right in. And as usual, may the best god win. So Apollo, god of prophecy, best known to all of us as the owner-operator of the Oracle at Delphi, the place where the ancients would go to seek advice from the divine, to learn what fate had in store for them, to learn the truth. And that's certainly true. And even alone, that by itself places Apollo on the top of the shelf in the Greco-Roman tradition. But as we'll learn, it's only part of Apollo's story. He is, in fact, a veritable Swiss Army knife of gods. Now, beyond prophecy, he's also the god of healing, of archery, music, and arts, sunlight, knowledge, herds and flocks, and protection of the young, among many, many others. That's the first list.
He is a jack of all trades.
He is, and yet master at all of them. I mean, incredibly adept at every one of these categories, which we'll learn. It's very, very impressive. So not only was he known for these things, he invented many of the categories themselves. So wasn't just great at music, he kind of invented it. He wasn't just great at archery, it was kind of his thing. So he was something of a Renaissance man.
Or the Renaissance.
I was going to say he would have been if he were a man, and yet he was a god, and the Renaissance had not yet been invented. So he was even inventing that before its time. Apollo, definitely among the most important of the gods, certainly among the most complex. And what I didn't know, he's also the most Greek of all the gods. He is truly like the Greek national deity. He's more Greek than pretty much everything. Greeker than Eros, and Zorba, Giannis, big fat weddings. Greekest of the Greek, you name it, he's there. And we talk about this sometimes, where the Greeks and the Romans will often have kind of 2 different versions of their gods, 2 different names.
Yep.
You got Dionysus as Bacchus, you got Ares and Mars being kind of the same figure. Not so with Apollo. There's just one Apollo. You get Apollo, you ask anybody, they're going to say, that's Apollo. Greek, Roman, miscellaneous. There was a brief period where some of the Roman poets tried to call him Phoebus. But it never stuck. Something as glorious as Apollo cannot be summed up with a name as flaccid as Phoebus. It's never quite worked. So Apollo is Apollo. So let's get to his origin story. He was the son, of course, of Zeus and Leto. Now, we all know Zeus the god of gods, the big kahuna. His mother, Leto, a little bit less familiar. She's best known, in fact, for just being Apollo's mother.
Right.
But the mom of Apollo and his twin sister Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. So the two of them were quite the dynamic duo. Leto is the second best known pure mother in mythology, next to Demeter, whom you covered in our previous episode.
Right.
So a couple of well-known mothers there. Now, Leto is often described as kind of matronly, very demure, very quiet, very mild, but she has a certain hidden beauty that catches the eye of Zeus. Not that it's terribly hard to catch the eye of Zeus. We know his eye is
wandering,
to say the least. But still, he finds that quiet beauty. They have their courtship. And once Leto is with child, carrying Apollo and Artemis, of course, Hera finds out. Now, astute listeners to the show will remember Hera as a recurring figure. She's the wife and the sister of Zeus, kind of a complicated arrangement, but really fueled by jealousy and always trying to complicate matters in the name of that jealousy. So Hera finds out that Zeus and Leto have gotten together, that Leto is expecting, and she gets that rage, that jealousy that comes across. She does not come across well at all in this episode, by the way. So keep that in mind. We've heard some pretty rough stuff before, but
right,
boy, this is hitting bottom for her. So Hera, in her jealousy, she bans Leto from giving birth on terra firma, on solid ground. Not that you can't give birth, but you just can't do it on solid ground. That's the rule.
Little sharks with laser beams.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's very specific. It's very, very articulate. So Leto seeks shelter in many lands. She tries many places, but everybody rejects her because, frankly, everyone's still afraid of rubbing Hera the wrong way. She's got a bit of a temper. And yet Apollo saves the day. I know what you're thinking. Apollo is still in the womb, and yes, he is. But from the womb, he is already advising his mother. I'll tell you what, Mom, there is a floating island called Delos, the middle of the Greek islands. It is neither land nor sea. It's a floating island. And Leto says, okay, thank you, son to be. Lands on Delos, and sure enough, it's exactly what he prescribed it to be. So they land, they let her give birth. And Apollo is already giving valuable guidance, giving directions before he's even born. So really impressive from the start. The birth takes place. All the goddesses come around. They're all present for the birth, except, of course, for Hera, who boycotts true to form.
Was not invited.
Nope. And Apollo comes out, and he's born clutching a golden sword, which I imagine from a childbirth perspective must have been rather uncomfortable. Let alone twins is going to be challenging for anybody. But once weaponry gets involved, look out. But Apollo shows up in grand form. He arrives. Everything on Delos turns to gold. The island is filled with this lovely ambrosial fragrance. Swans circle the island 7 times. The nymphs sing in delight. He makes a big entrance. The other goddesses come around. They wash him clean. They cover him in a nice white garment. And they fasten these golden bands around him. A little bit of sort of baby jewelry, baby bling. He's very, very stylish, even for minute 1. His mother, Leto, cannot feed him. So Themis, who's the goddess of divine law, she steps in and gives him ambrosia, which is the nectar of the gods, which makes people divine. And as soon as he tastes that, Apollo breaks free of his bonds and he makes 3 declarations. He said, I will become the master of the lyre, which is a musical instrument, kind of an old-fashioned harp. I will become the master of archery, and I will interpret the will of Zeus to all of humankind. Remember, he's like 10 minutes old. So very ambitious from a very, very early age. I know people in their 40s who have not accomplished any of these things. And there he is, just making these statements. The goddesses are all very impressed by the entrance, by the fortitude, the confidence. They're also confused because the lyre has not been invented yet. Archery is not yet a thing. But Apollo will take care of all that in due time. So Zeus appears. He's calmed Hera. He shows up on the scene, gives his son a golden headband, which is going to become part of Apollo's signature look. And after the birth, after Apollo was born, the floating island of Delos becomes fastened to the earth. It becomes a sacred place for Apollo forevermore. So it's sort of his gift back, is this floating island gets its purchase upon the earth as kind of an early gift.
Yeah. Okay.
So I got to hand it to his twin sister, Artemis. She deserves some credit. Now, she arrives first among the 2 twins. Okay. In some traditions, she actually assists her mother with the birth of Apollo. So again,
very precocious. Yeah.
Hours old and already providing significant value, significant overachievers, both of them. So very impressive to both of those. The early years, so they start working together as a child. Apollo builds an altar right there on Delos using the horns from the goats that his sisters hunted down. So they've got a good partnership going. And these building skills are going to form his reputation. He's going to become sort of an authority on construction. He'll be the god of building new cities, among other things. When he's a little bit older, his dad sets him up with a new ride. So Zeus gives him a golden chariot drawn by swans. Much better than the 1979 Chevy Chevette that I received as a 16-year-old, which never left the garage, not once. But Apollo was, again, more ambitious as a child, I think, than I was. So he probably earned it. So he's getting a little older. He's laying the groundwork. He's working that to-do list that he said he would at the age of 10 minutes. He invents the lyre, this ancient harp. He with his sister, he invents archery. So they turn that into a sport. He also starts teaching people how to heal. So as if being a great musician is not enough, being a great, athlete as an archer is not enough. He starts doing some subtle doctoring on the side just to work that in. Very impressive. Every mother's dream so far. Apollo's grandmother, Phoebe, is also taken by her grandson, gives him the shrine at Delphi, his ultimate landing place, as a birthday gift. So he's set up for his best known role, the god of prophecy to be. This is his pad, and that's the gift. And he says, "Thank you, Grandma, but I'm not ready for it yet.
Oh.
I got some scores to settle." So this is where the story gets a little dark. What's been a sunny story of childhood takes a bit of a turn. Right. So the Oracle of Delphi had a previous guardian, and it was Python, who is this big serpent dragon monster.
All right,
he'd been running the place for some time. Yeah, well named. And it turns out when Apollo's mother, Leto, was pregnant, Hera did more than just give her the old curse about not giving birth on terra firma. She also sent Python, the snake monster, to hunt her to death.
Oh.
So I gave the impression earlier it was just more of an inconvenience, but Hera was taking it to the next level, sending this monster to hunt her down. Now, Python is not able to kill Leto, but he does unfortunately assault her pretty badly before the birth. And so Apollo knows this. And his earliest opportunity in his childhood, he avenges the harm against his mother. He hunts down Python. And right there, right in the sacred cave of Delphi, with his bow and arrow, kills him. Not just a bow and arrow, in fact, it was a sacred bow and arrow given to him by Vulcan, who will appear in the second segment of this episode.
Yes, he will.
He's using that, his counterpart. He's using that weapon to get Python. Now, there are differing accounts as to how old Python is when he kills, how old Apollo is when he kills Python. Some say he's still a baby, so very much overachieving. Some say he's a little bit more of a young adult. But what a son to his mother either way, coming at that young age and avenging that terrible act. So he's exacted his revenge, and he goes to Zeus, his father, and he says, "Because I've done this, I would like to always be the best at divining the future. Other people can do it, but I want to be the best." And Zeus agrees. He says, "That's fair. You can have that." But there's a catch.
Oh, always.
Now, Apollo, of course, had understandable motivation to kill Python, and yet he did commit a blood murder. And even though Apollo is a god, there's still a price to be paid when you're a murderer. So he does need to pay that price. So Python's mother, Gaia, wants Apollo sent to Tartarus, which is the underworld, the hell of the time, and asks Zeus for that punishment. And Zeus doesn't agree, considering the full picture, but he does cast Apollo out of Olympus, and he instructs his son to get purified. So Apollo takes it seriously. He becomes a slave for 9 years. And he really does hard labor to atone for this sin of blood murder against the monster that assaulted his mother. At the end of it, he does his time. He's purified in a ritual from Zeus himself and finally returns back to Delphi. Gaia hands over custody of the oracle once and for all after having done this time. Now, being the class act that he is, some accounts say that Apollo, when given the keys to the temple, establishes the Pythian Games, named after the late Python, as a little bit of a thank you to Gaia, his mother. He's like, sorry, I killed your snake monster son, but he did assault my mom and in my defense. Anyway, please enjoy these second-tier Olympics as a token of my appreciation.
There you go.
But it's an important experience because Apollo becomes the one who learns that when you commit a sin, you've got to pay for it, and then you can purify others. And that's what becomes part of his mission. He makes men aware of their guilt, aware of what they've done wrong, and he's there to purify them. So if you listen really closely, you can almost hear the early notes of Roman Catholicism starting to take shape. The whisper of guilt in the wind. Yeah, still not fully formed, but it's coming. So the deed is settled. Apollo returns to Delphi, but there's really nobody there. Python hasn't run it really well. So he needs to recruit people to live there, to work there. He sees a ship sailing from.
Puts the new management sign out.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. The new boss, the sheriff in town. Right. So he sees a ship coming in from Crete. He does what a god does, turns himself into a dolphin, springs aboard, and he must have been a very charming dolphin because the crew is awed into submission. They say, "Dolphin, we will go wherever you'd like." And he sends them to Delphi, sets them on a course. So eventually he reveals himself to be Apollo. All the crew members are very impressed. They're recruited into his service. They accept him. He's so convincing, he may even be, at this point, the early days god of marketing, using a mascot, using just a good stunt to get folks on his side. And this, as an added bonus, makes Apollo in time the patron saint of sailors, keeping them safe on their journeys. Jason and the Argonauts and others owe a lot of their journey safety to him. So he's at Delphi, and I can't overstate how important the temple at Delphi was at that time. It's under this towering mountain marked Parnassus. It's considered really the center of the world. There's no shrine like it. You've got pilgrims coming not just from Greece, but from all over. Everybody who wants to consult it, to know the will of the divine, know what's going to happen in the future, and more importantly, know the truth.
Right.
And this is important because no false word ever passes the lips of Apollo. He's the god of light because of that, because he's only truth and only light. And he's the proprietor, but he does some delegating. He's got priestesses who do most of the work. He's good management material that way.
Yeah.
So the priestess will come. She'll sit in like a three-legged stool by a cleft in the rock. There's a special vapor that comes up. And then the pilgrim poses a question, and the priestess goes into something of a trance, a Delphic frenzy, if you will, to coin a phrase, and channel the truth. So then we'll get to the heart of what the divine says. We'll convey that. Now, of course, the oracle is going to play a role in a lot of mythical stories. Apollo is really just a minor character in a lot of them, kind of like Cupid in our last episode.
Right.
He runs the joint, he runs the show, he owns the place. But ultimately, it's the oracle that just kind of sets the plot in motion. So he does still retain this powerful symbolism of being this link between God and man. And even though he's, every god has a good side and a dark side, because he's coming from a place of purification, his power to reveal the truth, his power to show people the will of the divine and do that in a sincere way makes him, I think, mostly good. And that's what you'll hear about Apollo in the grand scheme of things, is on the whole, give or take a few violent episodes, pretty good guy. Now, on another violent episode, as a footnote to his youth, so Hera, not to be fully vanquished, gives one more try to exact
she's
some
persistent.
harm. She's nothing if not persistent. It's kind of her jam. So she sends a giant, Titios, to once again hunt down Leto, poor Apollo's mother, and assault her. Now, Apollo won't have it. He's had enough of this. So he joins up with Artemis. They both attack the giant with giant arrows and this golden sword. And after the battle, they talk Zeus into saying, look, these guys need to be punished. This is enough. We can't let these guys, we can't let Hera keep sending these villains toward our mother. So Zeus agrees. He sends this giant to the underworld and does the classic, early part of the classic punishment, pegs him to the rock floor covering 9 acres, and institutes the old standby, a pair of vultures feasting daily on his liver. So that's what the giant has to pay as a price for that. And you can imagine Apollo and Artemis at this point having some frustrations about old Aunt Hera. It's getting old. So if anytime you ever have any kind of feelings about your aunts or even your uncles, just remember, and maybe this is a message to my future nieces and nephews, all 14 or 15 of them, when you're listening to this down the road, it could be worse. To go easy on old Uncle Matt. It's not that bad. So I mentioned Apollo's protector of the young, and he's known by that. He becomes this nurturer, this educator. He oversees the education of the youth. By some accounts, he even in many ways invents education. And it becomes the custom that when boys get to a certain age to become a man, they cut their long hair and devote it to Apollo. That's kind of their little ritual for him. And his mentorship is legendary. He mentors future kings. He saves children from death. He passes on knowledge and everything from the medicine that he invented to the language of birds. And of course, his core curriculum, how to predict the future. And because of that connection with the youth, he's often depicted that way. He's very young himself, very handsome, beardless, bow in his hand. Usually he's got a lyre with him, typically nude, as it should be. Although later on in later eras, as they get a little bit more uptight, he's kind of got a cloak or some kind of robe. But a real good, handsome physical specimen by all accounts with that sort of youthful sheen. Now, one thing about Apollo is he's not crazy about hubris. Hubris, of course, that quality of being excessively prideful, full of overconfidence, arrogance. And this gets to some of the darker elements of Apollo's personality. And he takes hubris very seriously. He's offended by it.
This is where the vengeance comes in.
That's right. That's
wrath.
right. So Niobe, who's the queen of Thebes, shows some great hubris in front of Apollo, boasting that she is superior to Leto, Apollo's mother. Again, just everyone's walking on this poor gal. Because Niobe has 14 children, 7 boys, 7 girls, where Leto has only the 2.
Yeah, well.
Now, we should point out the 2, pretty extraordinary.
Right.
Really very, very accomplished. But some people prize quantity over quality. Niobe is one of those. Not only that, but she doubles down. She mocks the appearance of Leto's children, saying Apollo looks effeminate and Artemis looks manly. And Leto, for all of her gentleness, for all of her sort of maternal, caring qualities, she's heard enough. And in a move that is like pure mob boss, she just instructs her kids to kill the whole family. Just says, Apollo, Artemis, you take 7, let's get it done. And because they're devoted to their mother, they do exactly that. So Apollo takes the boys, Artemis takes the girls, and 7 and 7 wipes them out. Quick work. And that is the power of hubris. If Leto says, you can send a serpent dragon after me, you can send a giant, we can work something out. But you start to insult my children, forget it. You're done. It's over.
Yeah.
Family.
Yeah.
Now, we got to mention Apollo is a great warrior as well. Famous role in the Trojan War, although surprisingly, even though he is the most Greek of gods, he actually sided with the Trojans in the Trojan War, not the Greeks. So he was a surprising choice there. But Greek King Agamemnon earlier captures Chryseis, who's the daughter of Apollo's priest, Chrysis, and refuses to return her. So Apollo's not happy about how the king is treating his right-hand man. He actually infects his arrows with the plague and shoots them into the Greek encampment to spread some disease among the troops. And this is effective. The Greeks get sick. King, they give her up, they send her back, which causes what's known as the anger of Achilles, which of course becomes the theme of the Iliad.
Right.
And sets in motion the entirety of the Trojan War, which I'm sure, had we not this crisp 90-minute time limit, we would be able to go into much more detail about. We'll save that for subsequent episodes. But of course,
come up in the second half.
It will. Oh, okay. Very good. Foreshadowing. Unintentional. Good. So ultimately, Apollo causes the death of Achilles by guiding that arrow from Paris into the heel of Achilles, which of course is where we get the Achilles heel, the point of weakness. So some little seeds in there that will foreshadow other stories, but let it be known that he had a key role in that war, and in many other wars, fought the Indians on behalf of Dionysus.
Right.
Number of battles where he was very successful. So all that said, a discussion of Apollo is not complete without talking about his musical prowess. Now, we mentioned that he had invented the lyre. We mentioned that he would, he invented string music. String music specific. Maybe not all of music, but string music is attributed to him. He's a frequent companion of the Muses. He becomes their chorus leader. He's also the god of banquets and a working musician. So he actually will play at weddings. In fact, I did not know this, but the wedding of Cupid and Psyche, recounted in episode 2,
right?
Apollo was the entertainment. He was the wedding band. So he came in and did a few numbers. He also, to take it back to episode 1, he would perform at the Bacchanals, the Dionysus wine-soaked 3-day festivals. Apollo would show up, play a few sets. So the guy was everywhere. Yeah, but performances aside, it was really the musical contests, I think, to get to the heart of Apollo. That can really combine like his divine musical talent with his hatred for hubris of those who would dare challenge him.
Right.
The earliest of these, Pan, who's of course the god of nature, he challenges Apollo, blows on his little pipe, thinks he sounds pretty good, thinks, I'm satisfied with that. I sound good.
I'm also a god.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he is the god of nature, and he's playing the pipes of Pan. So he challenges Apollo to a music contest. Apollo begrudgingly accedes. He plays one stroke on his lyre. The contest is over. One note does it. Everybody says, Apollo, you're the winner. And Apollo, to get Pan back at some of his hubris, turns his ears into the ears of a donkey. He's like, because you thought you sounded so good, Pan, now you have donkey ears to go with your other animalistic parts. Yes. Which will sound like a mild punishment compared to the next story, where a satyr, half man, half goat, named Marsyas, he finds a flute, again, plays it, thinks he sounds great, and he challenges Apollo to a contest to be judged by the Muses themselves. Now that's sort of hubristic enough, but he takes it up a notch and he starts taunting Apollo before the contest even starts, which is not a great idea. He taunts him for having long hair, for having a fair face, smooth body, and for having skill in so many arts, which is a really strange
That's a
taunt.
taunt.
You're so good at so many things, like burn.
I
Strange
get that
taunt.
all the time.
Yeah, but Apollo says, "All right, man, let's on. It's on. Let's do it." So they set the rules. Each will take a turn displaying his skills, and the winner of the contest can, quote, do whatever he wants with the loser. So the stakes are very high. So the first round they both play. Turns out Marcy's pretty good, and it ends in a tie. And they say, the muses say, let's go to round 2. And Apollo says, okay, I'll tell you what, I'm going to add my melodious voice while I play my harp. And Marcy says, no, that's not fair. You can't do both. And Apollo says, well, you needed to blow air to play your flute, which is kind of like singing. So either we both get to use our skills or no one can use your breath at all. The muses say, it's a good argument. We got to go with it. So he plays and sings, mesmerizes the crowd, does Apollo, and is declared the victor. There's a variation of the story where Apollo actually, instead of singing and playing, actually plays his harp upside down and is still better than the other guy, which is also very impressive. So he's the victor. He beats Marsyas the satyr. And as the punishment, and remember, he can do whatever he wants to the losers. As the punishment, he has the satyr flayed, so slowly skinned alive. And the skin is then hung from a tree to remind the others, don't mess with a god and check your hubris at the door.
Yeah.
Oof. They paid the price on that one. This reminds me a lot of the, do you remember The Devil Went Down to Georgia? Charlie Daniels band? But yeah. It's a much different ending. I think Johnny, the challenger, beats the devil in that one.
Right.
Much more graphic. I've always thought, though, the devil kind of gets robbed in The Devil Went Down to Georgia. I think his solo is actually better. It's a little more inventive.
Yeah.
Takes some more creative risks.
That's my favorite part.
Definitely. Yeah. So I always felt bad. I guess I have literally sympathy for the devil in that one.
Yeah.
A word on love. Of course, Apollo has this beautiful, very talented, accomplished creature. Many lovers in this day. Queens, princesses, nymphs, you name it. And he experiences all the mythological erotic classics. He takes a couple of shots from Cupid's arrow, impregnates the occasional lover while taking the form of a snake, just like the old man used to. Yeah. He takes some male lovers as well over the years, the most notably Hyacinthus, who was killed by the errant throw of a discus and turned into a flower, which is where we get the hyacinth. But that did not work out well for those two young men, sadly.
No.
But Apollo hates to choose. And the best example of that, he falls in love with all 9 muses at once and insists on seeing them all in perpetuity. And as a result, he is never married, but has an erotic life that lasts with all 9 muses for many, many years. Despite being a bachelor on paper, however, he sires many children. He's got a lot of famous children who are celebrities in their times. There's bards, there's muses, there's seers, of course, in the family business, high priests, founders of cities, you name it. Also well known is Apollo for his failed love affairs, most notably Cassandra, who's the daughter of Hecuba and Priam. He wants to court Cassandra, kind of puts the moves on her. She says she will allow it on one condition: give me the power also to see the future. So Apollo's really smitten by her, so he grants the wish. He says, okay, you can do that. She gets the favor, but then goes back on her word and rejects him anyway. Now, he's angry about this, but, and I did not know this until this week, once a god bestows a personal favor, they can't take it back. So Cassandra is stuck with this ability, and Apollo can't do anything.
No take-backs.
No take-backs in the mythological world.
So
it can't be revoked. But Apollo, being the clever sort that he is, he gives her an extra curse. He says, okay, even though you'll be able to see the future, nobody that you tell about it will believe you. And that's what happened to Cassandra for the rest of her days. So she knows in the Trojan War that giant horse.
Yeah, dead, don't do it.
Nobody listens to her. Nope. She sees the future. She knows that Athena's going to get sacked in her own temple. Nobody believes her. So that's where we get the term Cassandra today. Somebody who is adept at predicting something, but listened to by no one.
Yeah, see, I didn't know that about her from the Trojan War, but I did not know that's where it came from.
Yeah, that's right. So Apollo, he wins some, he loses some, but you can't blame a guy for not trying. Right. One final item on Apollo's resume, and I should have mentioned this earlier: Olympic gold medalist, which normally would be the top line of your resume. The first Olympics, in fact, so the very first Olympic Games, he faced off against Ares, Mars, if you like, the god of war, in wrestling, which I assume would be Greco-Roman style,
right? Of course,
and defeated him. Yeah, so he was the Olympic champion in wrestling. Apollo was,
wow.
And since he was having a good time, he decided on the spur of the moment to join what they used to call the race. They didn't have fancy varieties on races. It was just the one race.
Yeah.
It was a simpler time. And he goes against Hermes, the another fellow Olympian god, the herald of the gods, and beats Hermes in the race. So a double victor, wrestling and running. So of course he wins both, and just the other notch in his belt of being the original Olympic gold medalist in both events.
Wow.
So it's a lot to cover, Andrew. We've tried to do justice with what I could in the time we've got. Of course, best known, Apollo is the god of prophecy and truth, but many things: slayer of monster, warrior, educator, protector, loving son to his mother, who really deserved better. Because his oracle was consulted before any city was formed, he's essentially a founding father of virtually every town in Greece at that time. And his biological prowess as a biological father of the children is legendary. Lover of women, lover of men, Olympic athlete, celebrity children. He's like Bruce Jenner and Caitlyn Jenner all rolled into one. But for our purposes, his role as a healer is probably the most compelling, because on his own, and eventually with his son, Asclepius, he becomes the ultimate force for healing. And in many cases, he is capable of delivering people from pandemics. So really the ultimate skill set for what we're asking these gods to do, for what we need now. So yes, Apollo had the dark side. While he educated children on one side, he would kill them when their mom got a little too mouthy on the other. But in this particular instance, yes, he can cure pandemics. Now, he does cause some of these pandemics.
Right, he does. Well. Yeah, he had that. He had that too.
So he's kind of, he's a little bit hit or miss. But ultimately, with all those impressive abilities, with the ability to heal, I think he becomes a very compelling candidate for delivering us to come off the bench and at least compete for the golden god.
Right.
So there we have it. There is Apollo in a nutshell.
Very good. Excellent. So we'll see how he stacks up once we get to Vulcan.
We will. A formidable candidate. So let's take a quick breather, and we'll come back with Vulcan right after the break.
All right. So we met Vulcan in our first episode, and Matt, you said you were looking forward to him because you said, and I quote, he was crafty, but also a little bit of a jerk.
Oh, so you're quoting me, not back to me now. Okay.
You back to you. Yes.
All right.
From his episode with Mars and Venus and trapping them. So here he is. And we will definitely find that he is very crafty. And at the end, we can decide how much of a jerk he really is. So
indeed.
Known as Hephaestus to the Greeks and Vulcan to the Romans. Vulcan was the god of fire, metalwork, crafts, technology, volcanoes, especially in the Roman tradition with volcanoes, hence Vulcan. Volcanoes.
Vulcan, yeah. It's good branding right there.
Right there, yeah. Historically, the name Hephaestus goes way back. It's probably pre-Greek. There's no Greek roots to it, but nobody really knows what it means. It could have been the guy's name. It could have been just something scribbled, but they have Minoan Crete writing, but nobody knows what it's referring to.
Interesting.
Vulcan, on the other hand, has many plausible different antecedents. The suggestion that I liked was a Sanskrit word, ulka, and Sanskrit being the language of ancient Hindu texts, and ulka means fire. So that seems to fit. And also, the hard V sound in Vulcan, as we say, it really comes from our barbarian-derived English. The Romans would say a much softer, more Vulcan sound.
Got it.
So that's god of fire. So it is agreed that Vulcan's mother was Juno. However, again, we have stories similar to Mars, where Jupiter may or may not have been the father. But in this case, I'm going to say that Jupiter was the father, primarily because Vulcan was the older sister to, or the older brother to Minerva or Athena,
right?
Whose birth was the motivation for Juno to conceive without Jupiter. And we know this because as we discussed, Minerva sprung out of Jupiter's head. But
Yes.
what we hadn't talked about was Vulcan was the one who did the springing.
Did the springing.
He took an axe to Zeus's head in order to free her, which probably had some satisfaction for him, as we'll see, to be able to do that. But so it makes more sense that he would have been Jupiter's son, and we use that trick on Mars. So
yes,
as a podcast, so we'll say that it was Jupiter's son.
And Jupiter and Zeus are the same figure for those following.
Yeah. I probably go back and forth sometimes. So
yes,
Vulcan had a little bit of a rough childhood, which seems to be a theme with a lot of these guys, especially in the Juno and Jupiter household.
Mm-hmm.
Vulcan was famously not considered very attractive, so it's a contrast to Apollo, right. At least for an Olympian. The artistic renderings that we have him don't really depict him as ugly per se, more kind of an average in real life kind of guy. But I think, on Mount Olympus, that puts you a little bit behind the bar. So a 5 in real life, maybe a 2 on Mount Olympus. So, and in addition, Vulcan, by all accounts, had some sort of limp, some sort of problem walking. So it's kind of interesting to have an Olympian with a disability. The ancient world was not particularly known for being friendly to people with disabilities.
No,
but here in this case, we have a god who has a limp. There may have been some historical connection with blacksmiths and limping. Bronze Age blacksmiths, which would have been the early part of where Greek myths were formed, sometimes used arsenic in the metalworking process.
Oh.
And now, as we would expect, that would cause arsenic poisoning.
Yes.
Among blacksmiths, but of course, that was not well known then.
Occupational hazard.
Yes, occupational hazard.
Along with burning.
Being a blacksmith was fairly dangerous job then. Ancient Greek OSHA was not very effective as an organization.
Very early days. Yeah, not the mature organization.
Understaffed, right. Fines,
budget cuts.
Yeah. So that may have been where it came from, but nobody really knows. But that's one of the conjectures. But how Vulcan acquired his limp has 2 different stories. One story is that he was born with a limp, and his mother, Juno, charmingly, threw him down from Mount Olympus when she saw that he had a malformed foot.
Oh my goodness! Adding injury to injury. That's
yes.
Bad form.
Yes. The other story is that Zeus threw him down from Mount Olympus because because Vulcan took Juno's side in a fight over Juno trying to drown Hercules while Jupiter was napping. So in that version, it was the fall that actually caused the limp. So he did not have a limp beforehand. But given what we know about his parents, I feel like we don't really need to pick just one of these.
No, there's probably a thread of truth to all of them. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. They both seem plausible enough to say, these both could have happened. Maybe Jupiter just made it worse. So in any case, the version that has Vulcan being tossed out as a baby, he is raised by 2 nymphs, one of them being Thetis, who will go on to be the mother of Achilles, and he's raised in a hidden cave by the ocean, and he just kind of stays there, playing with fire and metallurgy,
sure.
as you do,
right?
As a child. And then this is where but eventually he decides that he wants to get out of the grotto. He wants to reclaim his birthright, go back up to heaven, up to the heavens, to Mount
Still an Olympian. Yeah. Still got a birthright.
He wants to go back up. So, and this is where his craftiness first comes out. He sends up golden thrones for all of the Olympic gods. They're just beautifully made.
Oh.
So of course they accept them, and he's a master craftsman already, and they're all gold except for Hera's,
Ah.
which is made of adamant, but maybe with like some gold plating on it. I'm not sure, so that she'll accept it. In any case, as soon as Juno sits down, the one designed for her, a trap springs.
Oh my
And
goodness.
it grabs her arms, and she is trapped in the chair.
Now that is crafty.
Yes. And none of the gods can free her, including Jupiter. So Jupiter offers Venus's hand in marriage to whichever god can free Juno.
So even he can't
Now,
do it. Like, this is a
even he
serious
can't do
trap.
it.
Wow.
Yes, it's adamant. It's the real deal. That's actually the bars of Tartarus.
Okay.
Are made of that same metal. So
maximum security.
Yes, maximum security. So Venus agrees to this because she thinks that Mars is going to win, and she's already in love with Mars. So she thinks,
it's a good deal.
This is great. Sure, go ahead and do it. He's going to be the one that frees her. But when Mars goes down to force Vulcan back up to Olympus, it doesn't go so well.
No,
at least for Mars.
Right.
He attacks kind of without any planning. And according to this one Greek writer, Libanius, Vulcan fights him off with a shower of flaming metal. And I went down a rabbit hole on this trying to see if I could get the actual quotes, but the only edition I could find in English was like $130. So I said,
yeah,
I'll just take the internet quote for that.
Yeah,
so.
The Patreon account is not flush enough to handle that just yet.
Not yet. So no. So Mars can't break the cuffs physically either. So then it is Bacchus's turn.
Oh, well.
And he, as you may imagine, takes a slightly different track to this. He plies Vulcan, little wine, little conversation, comes down, and after a little while, they're best of buddies.
Sure.
And he invites Vulcan come back up to Olympus. He makes a deal. He provides a donkey for him to ride on all the way up to Olympus. And so
helpful because of the limp. Just
yes, and there are often are vases of Hephaestus in Greek on a donkey, and the donkey is associated with this. And another story that I'll come to later. So Vulcan agrees to free Juno in exchange for being able to come back up to Mount Olympus and being able to marry Venus.
I mean, kind of his plan all along.
Yes.
Yeah.
So because he came up voluntarily, he's the one that is given the prize, and that was kind of Bacchus' plan all along. There is a version of this where he actually marries Minerva or tries to marry Minerva instead, which maybe we'll talk about later. But the general story is that this is how he gets married to Venus. So the source for, and I'm going to just switch over to the Greek names here because this is coming out of the Iliad, for Zeus throwing Hephaestus from Olympus comes from the Iliad. At the end of the book one, the gods are having a bit of a family dinner, a big feast, and it's not going too well because there's strife between Hera and Zeus this time because they've picked different sides in the Trojan War.
Sure.
And Hephaestus tries to play peacemaker. He says, you guys are squabbling, you're setting the gods in tumult just for the sake of mortals, which doesn't seem worth it. Plus, you're ruining the feast.
Yeah, we're trying to have dinner here.
Exactly. It's very relatable. And in that quote, then he goes on to talk about Zeus throwing him out of Olympus for that past dispute. And he says, of Zeus, he caught me by the foot and hurled me from heavenly threshold. The whole day long I was carried headlong, and at sunset I fell in Lemnos. But little life was in me. There the sentient folk quickly tended me for my fall. So, that does bring back in, if you recall, in episode 1, it was Lemnos that he was going to when he set
Yes.
the trap.
That's
So
right.
we can see why that was so credible. Oh yeah,
It's a great
sure,
callback.
He's going to Lemnos. Of course, that's
Yeah.
credible.
Mhm.
So I kind of picture Zeus is just sitting there smirking the whole time he's listening to this story. But so he's rescued by the people from Lemnos, and then staying in the Iliad, we have an example of a god versus god battle. And this is between Hephaestus and the river god Scamandros, who is tied to the Scamander River, which was outside of Troy. So Scamandros is angered because of all of the Greek bodies that are being thrown into the river after Achilles kills them.
Sure.
So the river is being blocked, his waters are being fouled, and plus he's rooting for the home team of the Trojans anyway.
Yeah.
And he decides he's going to start a flood to drown Achilles. And in this case, Hera, who is the champion of the Greeks in this war, calls Hephaestus to attack the river god. And Hephaestus does. I'll quote from the Iliad here. He says, "And Hephaestus made ready wondrous blazing fire. First on the plain was the fire kindled, and burned the dead, the many dead that lay thick therein, slain by Achilles. And all the plain was parched, and the bright water was stayed." So he uses the dead bodies as kindling to start his fire. He gets it hot enough that it burns off the floodwaters.
Wow.
And then he turns his attention to the actual river. And then against the river, he turned the gleaming flame. Burned were the elms and the willows and the tamarisks. Tormented were the eels and the fishes and the eddies. The fair streams they plunged this way and that. So he basically sets the entire river on fire. The water is boiling. And Scamandros says, enough. I give up.
Yeah. Uncle.
He tries uncle. He sues for peace, promising, he's going to stay out of the war from then on, just call off the fire. And
Hera, fine, I'll take all the dead bodies I have to. I give up.
Yeah, I'll just wash them all down. And Hera calls Hephaestus off. And so, one in the win column for Hephaestus.
Good job.
And now we've already recounted the trap that Hephaestus set for Aphrodite and Ares in their fair in Mars's episode 1. He used those spider web thin net to capture them, humiliate them. But one thing we didn't really mention in that myth, he also demands the return of his bride gifts from Zeus for the marriage. And so according to one source that I found, that matches the ancient Greek divorce laws.
Oh.
So according to this source, that should be interpreted that they were divorced.
That was the deal breaker. Yeah, that was
the deal breaker. That was it. That demanding those presents, that was the symbolic of, right, we're getting a divorce. And in other sources, it appears that Vulcan or Hephaestus did go on to marry one of the Graces or Charities named Algaea and had 4 children with her. So
so we had a good second act. Yeah, after
so
the first round didn't go well.
Marriage.
I love it.
Yeah, so he moved on from there. When Vulcan wasn't making traps, he was making all sorts of crafts. Basically, when anyone had any bling or anything nice on Olympus in any of the myths, it was credited to Vulcan and his workshop. Minerva's weapons, you already mentioned Apollo's bow and arrow, Zeus's thunderbolts, the armor of Hercules, the armor of Achilles, all the palaces of Olympus, and chariots of the gods, including Helios.
Wow! So the master craftsman across the board.
Yeah, master craftsman. He had a very strong brand through all the mythological writing. And I'm going to mention a couple of the more impressive ones that he made for himself when we get to the curriculum vitae. Most impressively, Hephaestus was credited with forming the first woman, Pandora, who was kind of the Greek Eve, formed her out of clay. Then she was given all sorts of other gifts from other gods, but he was the one who sort of formed the first woman.
Wow.
In terms of worship, Festus Vulcan was more of a regional interest. He was somewhat popular in Athens, but always, of course, considered secondary to Athena. He was popular in Lemnos, which, I'm not sure how far that gets you, but
hometown favorite, though.
Yeah, he was a hometown favorite. And that was where he was reputed to have fallen, and where he fell, that spot where he exactly fell, was said to have cured madness.
Oh,
so that was nice. In Sicily, around Mount Etna, you had some shrines. In the city of Rome itself, there was a Vulcanalia festival, August 23rd. In part, it was held then because that was the highest fire danger season. So they wanted to offer a little sacrifice, maybe have a little controlled burn to prevent a catastrophic fire.
Sure.
So they'd have a giant bonfire, and then they would throw small animals and fish into the fire.
Okay.
So, as well as some grains. Then during Nero's reign, there was the Great Fire, where famously Nero was said to have fiddled.
Right.
And after that, the ante was upped a little bit, and they would have a Red Bull sacrifice, which you can interpret it either as an energy drink or a bowl that happens to be red.
Right.
But
high energy either way, I would assume.
Yes.
The adrenaline was pumping in any case.
Right. And a good time was had by all. And that's what I have on Vulcan.
Vulcan Hephaestus. Fascinating. Yeah. He's again a Zelig type figure, a bit of a mythological Forrest Gump, appearing in all sorts of very important moments.
Right. Yes.
Right.
He always gets a little bit of a shout out when anybody has anything nice, so that's good. But
that's right. Absolutely. All
nice
right.
stories.
Well, let's take our breather here and gear up for the grand finale, the categories, the judgment. Back right after this.
Okay.
All right, moving to the end. For some reason, in episode 2, I kept referring to these as the 6 categories, when in fact, the simple math now reveals that there are 5. So,
right,
correction made.
Right, I thought maybe you were counting the golden apple as its own category.
I think at some level I was, but I have no excuse. That kind of poor math is unacceptable. So I take all the blame.
Right.
Well, let's hit those categories. Andrew, you want to start us off with Immortal Combat?
Yes, this is Immortal Combat. This is probably the most interesting Immortal Combat round that we've had to date. The one where, perhaps some school kids or barflies may have actually discussed this sometime in the last 2,000 years. Right. So the good for Vulcan, he can project fire.
Yes.
Certainly enough to beat a river god.
Mm-hmm.
Which he does in both the Dionysica and the Iliad. So he's got 2 river gods under his belt.
And conquering water with fire is no mean feat. I mean, only Cleveland. Yeah, I can't really pull that off. That's besides Vulcan. Yes.
Yes. He can project molten metal, at least if he's attacked in his forge, which would not recommend.
No.
And he had some ability to lead a cavalry charge.
Mm-hmm.
In the war against the Giants, which was a war sometime after the war with the Titans, Vulcan and Bacchus led a decisive cavalry charge. And this is from Hyginus Astronomica. It says, after Jupiter had declared war on the Giants, he summoned all the gods to combat them. And Bacchus, Vulcan, and the satyrs came riding on donkeys. Since they were not far from the enemy, the donkeys were terrified, and individually they let out a braying such as the giants had never heard. At the noise, the enemy took hastily to flight, and thus were defeated. So
a bunch of donkeys.
A bunch of donkeys
carried the giants away. That's fascinating.
Yes, that is mythological combat goes, that is one of them.
Not bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the bad side, he can't fly, obviously. So that's
They barely walk.
Yeah, he has trouble with that too. And he certainly is no match for Jupiter, which we found out. And then in another myth of Prometheus, where Prometheus is tied to the rock, it is actually Hephaestus who does it, but he does it sort of under protest. However, he's intimidated into doing it by two of Zeus's hench gods, Kratos and Bia. So they just sort of bully him into doing it. So
hench gods. That's a new one by me. I like that.
Yeah. So that's what I have on Vulcan. A little good, a little bad.
Yeah, good, kind of a mixed bag there. I think on the Apollo side, you certainly have the war record. We talked about the Trojan War, also the Theban War. He was a hero in the Indian War, helping Dionysus conquer India, probably using perhaps some of those same donkeys. So clearly in the battlefield was pretty adept. On his own, of course, Apollo also defeated lizard monsters, giants, using fairly small weaponry, just a bow and arrow and a javelin from time to time when his mom was messed with. So he was able to take on a pretty formidable sized foe there. I think in terms of skill set, a double threat, right? Because he's got the skill with the weaponry, the bow and arrow, the javelin, but the athletic ability as well. He can run faster than anybody. He can wrestle better than anybody else can. I'm confident that if in his time they had the luge or synchronized swimming, he would have medaled in all those too.
Yeah.
So I think just at that pure athletic level, he's got the skills, but he also has the body to make it work. And one thing we learned too, he's not afraid to fight dirty when he has to. So if you cross his family, he's not above infecting an arrow with the plague, for instance, or so essentially a sort of an early practitioner of chemical weapons, decades or centuries, millennia before they were fashionable. So I think a pretty strong case in terms of combat here. I think the ability with the small weaponry, the proven metal on the battlefield, and I think as impressive as Vulcan's battle skills are, I think he's still hampered by the fact that he doesn't get around very well. I think he relies on some pretty heavy artillery they can only have in certain spaces. Clearly, he relies on the sonic appeal of donkeys to win many of his battles. Yeah. So I think my vote goes to Apollo on this one. I think.
Yeah, I think in some ways, and this might come up a couple of times when we're talking about this, but in some ways, as the god of fire, Vulcan doesn't quite pull out the personality of what you would expect or want from, he's not as heavy metal as you might want from a god of fire in his personality. And he's more of a reluctant warrior, and I think for that, he'd be much happier, back in the forge. He'll fight if you attack him or if his mother tells him to.
Sure.
But his heart's not really in the fighting so much.
He's a forger, not a fighter.
Yeah. He's a forger, not a fighter. That's very much. He's happy as a craftsman.
Yes.
So I'm going to agree with you. I think Apollo, with the far-reaching arrows, he can stay at a distance. I don't know how far Vulcan's really projecting that fire.
Yeah.
And I think Apollo's going to take that one.
Now, that said, Apollo also has the ability to heal. So I wasn't able to find any stories about Apollo healing himself. But I do think as a wild card, if Vulcan did get rubbed the wrong way and sent some fire in his direction, he might be able to do a little bit of an Olympian special to just heal himself up, lickety split, be just fine. So I think that even solidifies my vote for Apollo further.
No, yeah, I think that's a good point.
Great.
All right. So going on to the second round.
Yes.
With the score 1-0 for Apollo.
Yes.
This is curriculum deity, which is the it factor of, who would you rather be? Who would you rather follow? You want to start off for this one?
Yeah. So I think in terms of who I'd rather be, this is kind of a no-brainer. I mean, all due respect to Vulcan, but I mean, in terms of just having it all, Apollo's got it. I mean, he is, in our modern day interpretation, he is like the equivalent of like Muhammad Ali and Tom Brady and Jimi Hendrix and George Washington and like Dr. Spock and Mr. Spock, Albert Einstein, Brad Pitt, And on top of all that, he can also see the future. So he's really any kind of guy you want to be. He's great to his mom, gets along well with his sister. He's hitting on all the cylinders. So, and his kids are the best.
Got a nice island pad.
He had a couple of pads. I mean, we'll talk about that in a second, but he definitely had, similar to your discussion of Mars in episode 1, he had kind of his summer home and his winter home. There were temples in both. Fun little side note: when he went away in the winter, when he left Delphi, where the oracle was, he would go to his warmer climates. He would let Dionysus take care of the place when he was gone, which seems like a terrible. Yeah, house it seems like a terrible idea because the town drunk is not the guy you want keeping your eye on the place. So, as it turned out, there was no oracle activity that happened during those months. So it was really shut the place down, keep one eye open, gather the mail, maybe water the plants. That's it. So I think in terms of, and many, many houses, I mean, the amount of temples we'll talk about in a quick second, but no, I think, clearly revered in his country. And that kind of gets us to who would you rather follow? And I think as a worshiper, beyond these two main shrines, one, of course, in Delos is his place of birth, and then in Delphi, which we mentioned, the summer home is, I guess, the third. But dozens of temples all over the place, all throughout Greece. They were everywhere in the day. They were like franchises. They were like the equivalent of a Starbucks in Greece. If Starbucks had, Doric and Ionic columns everywhere and perfect mathematical ratios, were visited by people from throughout the world. So as a worshiper, that's appealing to me. It's very convenient. You can get your worship on anywhere you want. And I think as an added bonus, because he is the Greek national god, to worship Apollo is sort of like its own form of patriotism.
All right.
So you're both sort of, you're kind of at the same time, you're loving your country and you're saying your prayers all at once. And it's the equivalent of it. We had like a Saint America.
All right. Yeah.
That would be it. So, I mean, I think it's a strong case. I think both in terms of the guy you want to be and the guy you want to worship. So that's the case for Apollo.
All right. So I'll go through Vulcan a little bit here. And in the Iliad, we get a little description, and I'm going to use Hephaestus because that's what the text is, of his physical description. It says, Hephaestus took the huge blower off from the block of the anvil, limping, and yet his shrunken legs moved lightly beneath him. Then, with a sponge, he wiped clean his forehead and both hands, and his massive neck and hairy chest. And on the tunic, he took a heavy stick in his hand and went to the doorway limping. So, massive chest, massive neck, hairy chest, hairy neck, so it's a little bit of a different to contrast.
I would say so, compared to the hairless, beardless.
He's a little more of your kind of a blue collar guy,
right?
Is I think how it would, a muscular working man.
Mm-hmm.
And he was reputed to have 3 houses. He had the one on Olympus, and one in Sicily near that volcano we were talking about. That was where he had a forge, and one in one of the Greek islands that also had a volcano, and those were his forges. And and they, talking about his house on Olympus, it says it was made of imperishable bronze, adorned with stars and the finest among the immortals. So he had the nicest house. He got the workmen to come work off book.
Oh, that's right.
Some
patronage jobs. The metalwork was I'm sure stupendous.
Yeah. So it was good. In terms of his entourage, in the Iliad, we are also told that he had a second wife, Algaea, and he also had golden female-shaped automaton attendants in his workforce. So he had made golden robot ladies for his workshop.
That was a phrase I did not expect to come in this or any of these episodes.
He had the golden robot ladies, and he had automated wheeled tripod stools for himself to get himself around.
Nice.
So, and these were all come out of directly out of the Iliad that they had these things. In his forge in Sicily, this comes out of the Aeneid. It says, here's Vulcan's place, called the island of Vulcania, which, hither now the fire god repaired from heaven above, and the Cyclopses were hard at work, in his underground iron foundry, Brontes and Steropes and Pyramacon stripped in the buff.
Oh.
So he's got some, you know,
he's got some eye candy.
Buff.
Yeah.
Cyclops working
I
for
mean,
him.
Sure.
And then it goes on to say all the different stuff that they were working on. Athena's Aegis and had a surface of gold, like scaly snake skin, and a couple other things. But he says, let's put all that aside because we have to make something for Aeneas, and he orders that, and they all, all as one sort of respond and get on the new, so he ran a tight ship.
Yeah.
He had a nice workshop going. In terms of being a follower, we don't get a lot other than, Lemnos,
Mhm.
and also that Vulcanalia in Rome with, possibly some energy drinks. So,
yeah. And so you've got some people around him. Many are either robots or employees, or perhaps
employees
both.
with one eye.
Right. Some stripped down Cyclopes wandering about. Yeah. Okay. I mean, those are, but he strikes me as kind of a loner at heart. I mean, these are more sort of professional.
Yes.
Relationships.
Yeah. No, I think that's accurate. And so, I think that, to me, Apollo kind of ticks both the boxes on both these.
Yeah.
Has much more of a center of worship, and he's got a little more of the it factor, and I think that's what this is about.
Agreed. And something of an international star too. I mean, we talk about sort of Greece as its own entity, and many of these gods at the time were really well revered in the country. But this temple attracted folks from all over Europe, Asia. So really an international star for his day.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good vote for both of us for Apollo for category 2.
All right. So that brings us to Good God.
Good God.
And this is a tough one on Vulcan. He doesn't give me a strong moral vibe either way. He kind of doesn't do a lot of good things, or a lot of bad things, which for some of the gods, maybe would be enough. One of the more negative things that he does, which we may hit in a future episode, so I'll just mention it briefly, is Harmonia, who is the daughter of Mars and Venus, possibly while he was married to Venus. He curses a necklace that is given to her on the wedding, and that carries through for a long time, which wasn't really her fault. He wasn't, but he held a grudge there. He has a history of trying to play peacemaker between his parents, which is understandable, but doesn't really get very far in those.
Gets him thrown off the island, essentially.
He gets just
trying to have a nice dinner here.
Right. Yeah. And then he was against the punishment of Prometheus, as I said, but ultimately he carried it out.
Still did it.
When somebody shook their fist at him. And then you have that entrapment of Venus and Mars, which again, from an understandable place, but
yes,
maybe went a little bit far. So how are you looking at Apollo?
Well, Apollo, I think he scores a lot of points in terms of just the sort of benefactor notion, how he devoted a lot of his time to others. So you're talking about protecting the children, his work as a healer, his work as an educator. So there's a lot of good vibes there. I think, we mentioned in terms of his role at the Oracle itself about being this link between the divine and speaking the truth, giving people not just, a glimpse of their future, but letting them know what the truth was.
Right.
And they could interpret that as they would. And that ends up being the seed of a lot of these stories. But ultimately, he was the one giving them the light and the truth, and make of that what you will. At the same time, he does go on the occasional killing spree. I think, you can attribute that a bit to the need for vengeance for some obvious stories about his mom. I think he's motivated by the honor of his family. And so, one of the things that gets him past being a pure bad guy is he really does pay the price for it. I mean, he does work for 9 years as a slave. He doesn't just say, hey, my dad's in high places, I don't deserve a punishment. He does the time for 9 years, and he finally is purified, and he passes that forward. It ends up being the purifier for other gods and other men. So I think there's almost a selflessness to him that I think is rare among figures like this, not across the board,
Right.
but I think the amount of talent that he had and how much of that he put forth toward making others better is pretty impressive. Now, that said, Vulcan does have a soft spot for me because I feel like he is the notion of being a reluctant warrior is kind of impressive. He's not out there mixing it up. He's playing defense most of the time. I like the idea that he is, trying to get back in his family's good graces. He clearly gets a raw deal from the start because of a disability that was either no fault of his own or just an occupational hazard.
Right.
So I feel like he's acting even at his craftiest and his sneakiest, he's still doing it from the right place. So I think there's a case to be made for both here. This is a tight one.
Yeah. So that I do think the stories that you relayed, the flaying of the satyr.
That's not great. Yeah. No.
It sticks. It sticks with you. I mean, he did. He talked a little bit. He was, but that seems a little far.
There's an earlier version of that story where instead of hanging the flayed skin of the satyr up as a warning to everybody else, he uses it as a wineskin. So say, if I'm still going to flay this guy, but at least we're going to have something that we can use for storage. There's a practical purpose to that, but
right. I don't know if that's. I think that I like the warning part better because at least it has more of a community purpose. That's right. Of this is this is how justice is gonna be meted out, of bragging about flute playing. So all the flute players be warned out there.
Check
this is what can happen. And when we talk about the what kind of what they're bringing to the table, it's kind of interesting. I think how much more of a smith god Vulcan is viewed at than just fire. Like, I think fire would be enough. God of fire.
Yeah. Powerful.
Yeah. But, and I think at that time, that was high tech. Right. The metalworking, that was high tech, and that was, and especially if you were, these stories were being told around, for warrior halls or whatever, they all would have had their swords, and that was the thing that kind of separated them, or having that technology was important to defending the city state and all that kind of stuff. So you can almost think of him as a high tech, like a Bill Gates,
sure,
sort of figure, like
of his day,
his day, or so yeah. I think the flaying, I just can't get past.
Yep.
I can't get past the flaying and the children killing.
Those are definitely hard strikes. I think I'm with you. I think I give Vulcan the edge on this one. And I think part of my logic is that he's doing a lot with what he's been given. I think when you compare the limited resources relatively to other, obviously, Olympian gods, but when you think about the disadvantages that Vulcan has and what he's able to accomplish in his work, in his contributions to his family, his community, his economy,
yes,
compared to Apollo, who, while achieved a great amount of things, was clearly a prodigy from the
golden boy. He was the golden boy.
He was, in every literal sense. And I think he got a lot of mileage with what he had, but ultimately, character-wise, I give Vulcan extra points for making the most out of having a little bit less.
All right. Yeah. No. All right. So we're in agreement.
Yes.
And that makes us 2-1, and takes us to the iconography round. Do you want to start off, or?
Yeah. So the better legacy. Now, Apollo's got, obviously the name has carried a lot of weight over the years. We probably know the best, the missions of Apollo from the 1960s from NASA. They were named by the manager of NASA at the time, Abe Silverstein, who later said, and I'm quoting, "I was naming the spacecraft like I'd name my baby." And he chose it at home one evening. He said he chose it because he felt, quote, "Apollo riding his chariot across the sun was appropriate to the grand scale of the proposed program." So just as Apollo himself was a bit of a mixed bag, obviously over the course of the Apollo program, there were ups and downs. And you've got Apollo 1 as a downside, never lifted off. Of course, four astronauts died in the launch pad. But then you've got the glorious Apollo 11, first landing on the moon. So a lot, different extremes of the spectrum. And then you've got somewhere between like Apollo 13, which of course is didn't quite make it to where it was going, but it did arrive home safely. So it always brings to mind nothing but problems in Houston. And in my experience, both of those are probably to be avoided. So we'll call that one in the middle. Of course, Apollo Creed in fiction, very popular character in the Rocky Balboa series, but like Apollo, again, mixed bag. Like when he went up against Rocky in Rocky 1 and to some degree in Rocky 2, fared very well. Right. When he fared against when he went against Ivan Drago in Rocky 4, did not work out well.
No,
not at all.
He might have been a candidate for the hubris.
That could very well be. Yeah, especially when you consider all the sort of xenophobic puffery that he put on before that fight, living in America, that Uncle Sam had. Yeah, that's a great point. Hubris indeed. So ups and downs there. Of course, the Apollo Theater in Harlem. Very famous for launching the careers of countless great artists: Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Aretha Franklin, Stevie Wonder, Supremes, Jackson 5. Has a name, however, does not get a lot as the name of a person in this day and age. Now, there are some rare examples. You've got Apollo Anton Ono, of course, the American speed skater, and he deserves that name because he was, of course, a multiple Olympic champion. So he kind of checks that box as an Apollo. The youngest son of Gwen Stefani and Gavin Rossdale was named Apollo, who I'm sure will end up being a perfectly competent musician. So he fits that part of the bill. But ultimately, I think when you're naming your kid Apollo, you're really asking a lot. You're putting a lot of pressure on him. So it's probably for the best that we don't have too many of those. But I think probably my favorite in the sort of legacy department is in psychology. We've got this Jungian archetype. Carl Jung had an Apollo archetype. And he would attribute to this archetype people who favor thinking over feeling, favor distance over closeness, who see Jung saw a disposition to over-intellectualize and maintain emotional distance. So I can understand why I am drawn to that type. There's a certain kinship that I feel. So for all of my own liabilities as an athlete and a musician, all those other things, emotional distance, something I've really perfected over the years. So all in all, from the Apollo missions to areas of pop culture, I think a pretty strong connection. Apollo himself as a god will appear in Clash of the Titans and all those various kinds of movies. But I think the lasting legacy through his namesakes, I think are befitting of where he's landed.
All right, yeah, that's some interesting stuff. For Vulcan, and it's one of those things where it almost always comes through the Latin tradition. There's not a lot of things named Hephaestus. There's not a lot of Heffy.
Doesn't roll off the tongue. No.
Yeah. So coming out, but volcano obviously is one. Vulcanized rubber, and vulcanization is process of adding heat to something in order to improve it. And so
that's good.
Vulcanization. There is a Vulcan Kawasaki motorcycle.
Okay.
But it is a type of motorcycle. There's a cryptocurrency and NFT marketplace called Vulcan Forged.
Well,
I don't know, but adding forged to your cryptocurrency maybe is not helping out.
I mean, it sounds like a cross promotional opportunity for this podcast to me. But,
maybe
that's on for later.
We can edit that out. The Vulcan Quick Draw, which is a magnetized, as you know, is a magnetized gun holster.
Thank you.
That's
I'm wearing mine right
desk.
now. Yes.
It would be under your desk.
It's one of those.
Under the car dashboard. It's sort of one of those Star Wars Greedo sort of
yes
holsters. So in literary fiction, Vulcan's Forge, not to be confused with Vulcan Forged, is a story about a new limitless power source erupting from an underwater volcano. And there is Vulcan, an alien sci-fi romance. From Demelza Carlton, and I'll quote from that one. Every New Year's Eve, Vulcan takes the stage at the most exclusive club in the colony. And every year, New Year's Eve, shy librarian Hestia takes the same table to watch the show. But this year, Hestia is making a New Year's resolution that could change everything if she dares.
What is this? Is that it's mythological erotic fiction?
I would say, yeah, maybe, it's romance.
Okay, I apologize. Yes,
it is a romance. And just to clear, I did find one in this series that it was about Cupid, which we missed at the last episode. But in that one there appear to be many cupids.
Mm.
And can a lonely cupid find love, or will he find victim to the cupid's curse too? I don't know what that is, but that is for anyone who is interested. That is Demelza Carlton,
Excellent
writer of that series.
Add that to my reading list.
Yeah, there you go. And of course, Vulcan has a planet in Star Trek. As a fictional planet.
Right, that's right.
And
hey, if I can throw out Apollo Creed, I think you can evoke Mr. Spock.
Yes, there you go. And there is a Vulcan Park in Birmingham, Alabama, and it features the world's largest cast iron statue of Vulcan.
Oh yeah,
so yeah, right in their park. So Birmingham has a history as a steel making town. And so they have a Vulcan Park, and there is a Vulcan Museum there.
We'll have to add that on the list of our God versus God tour.
Yes, there you go.
To an outdoor program.
And there is a lesser known X-Men villain named Vulcan. Has some sort of fire powers, one assumes.
I'm sure he's wound to show up in one of these movies as the multiverse continues to unfold.
Yes,
only a matter of time.
Right, there you go. So that's, and Vulcan, neither Vulcan nor Hephaestus, clicked on the names.
Right.
They're just a handful of children so named in the U.S. every year. So
those poor bastards. Yeah.
So there you go.
Well, I think my vote has to go to Apollo on this one. I think, with all due respect to Vulcanization and erotically charged stories of librarians on New Year's Eve, I think between space exploration, music, and fictionalized boxing, I think that it's a pretty strong story that lasts millennia.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. I think not enough of the Star Trek fan for that to sway me. I think maybe if I was there when I did a lot of searching on Vulcan, there was a lot of Star Trek things that came up. Greetings.
Then there were a lot of spacecraft. Grips. Yes. So strong legacies in their way, both of them.
Yes. Right. But I'm going to agree with you in Apollo. So that brings us to 3-1. So Vulcan cannot catch up on points, but see how close he can make it. And maybe give us reason to overturn here in the matinee idol.
Let's see.
So I guess I'll go first on this one.
Please.
I think it's this was a bit of a tough one, and I think I emailed you earlier that I spent an inordinate amount of time thinking about the matinee idol section. And there are a couple of ways you could do it, I think. And I couldn't really pick on either, so I'll go over briefly just each one of them. There's plenty of trauma. There's plenty of drama in his early life. Very strained relationship with both his parents. Gets tossed out of heaven a couple times. He grows up in a grotto, which is always cinematically interesting. He's got an unfortunate marriage with a love triangle. All that.
That's good.
So one way would be just to tell a straight origin story, along kind of the lines of what I outlined in Mars. But, as an origin story, origin story of a Smith god who then goes on to serve those same parents. I wasn't clear how you connect that to the rest of the story, because then you go and he goes through all this stuff and he's serving the same parents, but not a huge payoff. So then it kind of came to me that this has something of a Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer story. So
is that right?
Yeah, Rudolph is a misfit. He's an outcast, and because of the way he looks,
differently abled. Yes,
he is differently abled. He's rejected, and everyone's terrible to him because he's different. Then he proves himself. He proves his worth by in a different way than everybody else, and then they come to accept him because he has proven his worth. So
that's an excellent analogy. Saves the day. Yep,
a little bit of a redemption story in that way. But I thought, if you treat it a little bit more allegorically and maybe stretch the end a little bit, I think you could elevate it. So in this case, I'm thinking everyone's human. Jupiter and Juno are ultra rich people, kind of a period piece, maybe Napoleonic era. So it's sort of a Succession meets Vanity Fair sort of vibe. Vulcan has his limp, rejected by his mother because of it, gets shipped off in this case, to like an artsy cousin in a ramshackle place by the sea. And he experiences art and a little bit of the bohemian lifestyle, gets up sculpture, crafts, mechanical engineering, and he's a natural at it. He's and then he gets older, reclaims his birthright, and we have the kind of the sculpture thing, and I would leave in the trapping his mother in the seat, but then as you play it, like it's sort of a joke. Everybody realizes it's not really a joke.
No, it's not.
No. So
that's pretty good. I would watch that movie. Yeah.
And his father is impressed with him and realizes, he's going to be useful.
Mm-hmm.
We were at this Napoleonic era. Trains are maybe starting to be a thing.
Okay.
This guy is somebody I want to have around. He comes back, demands to be the heart of the family, interrupts his brother's marriage to his beautiful cousin, and gets married to her. But of course, that ends up blowing back up on him. Venus, his brother, have an affair that blows up, and he ends up walking out on the family, goes to a place on the seaside with a huge workshop, and get a glimpse of him with his new wife, a new family, and he's rejected all of that. But
it's a dare I say a Hollywood ending, even.
Yeah. So
after a hard scrabble upbringing, that's a tremendous arc. That's very well done.
And in this case, I would have him played by Matthew McFadden. And
naturally he'll
and,
have the accent down just right. He'll have all the Succession in his genes already.
Yeah, and Nicholas Braun as cousin Greg as Mars. So there you go.
It practically writes itself.
And it practically writes itself. Yeah,
very nice.
But you notice to do that, I had to kind of tilt the story away, which is
a bit of creativity there.
Yeah, which I think does sort of downgrade it a little bit from what the story is. It's not like you could have say Citizen Kane and say, Thanatos was there in the room when he died. That's the story.
Right.
So it's Citizen Kane. I win. That's the best one. But it's the best story.
Hey, you know what? This is the art of myth, though, right? It begins with a core, and it's what you do with it afterward and over time. That
expand on it.
Yeah. That's very good.
Right.
Interesting. That's very compelling. Well, for this category for Apollo, at a sort of cinematic level, of course, genre-wise, it's kind of got it all. It's got a story of revenge. It's got monsters, war scenes. It's got seeing the future, so a little bit of a paranormal aspect to it. Love affairs with women and men. So you've got multiple audiences to bow to there. Plucky children are involved. He's got musical numbers, musical contests. So as a catch-all, it really has a little bit of everything. So really more of a limited series, I think, than a feature film to squeeze all that in. At the same time, because Apollo is so richly endowed with talent, I think there's a balancing act. He's almost a hard guy to root for because he is so good at so much, which I think is even why one of his competitors in the musical contest couldn't help but just mock him for being so great at so many things. Now I kind of understand where that came from. Right. So it's hard to picture him as a compelling protagonist. That said, it is also at its core the story of a young son's love for his mother, who's very, very much mistreated by other devious family members, and clearly not above taking drastic measures to exact revenge after that. So I think there's a story there. It's much more of the kind of a blockbuster, more special effects driven big story than the kind of more emotional story.
Yeah, it's kind of sprawling. It's
sprawling. Yeah, it's an epic unfolding over many hours. Casting wise, though, and I kept going in circles about this, but ultimately I kept coming back to Academy Award winner Jared Leto. Okay. Of course, from Dallas Buyers Club. First of all, because his last name is the name of Apollo's very mother, who's the core to this story. He's also very much fitting of the Apollo archetype. He's very handsome, very lithe, kind of hairless. He has a sort of masculine and feminine qualities. He's ageless. I mean, the guy just turned 50 and looks like he could be 20. He's a musician as well,
Yeah.
a touring, practicing musician. His band is 30 Seconds to Mars, which on its own could be a future Apollo mission.
Oh, yeah.
In the other sense of the term. And he's kind of a strange dude, kind of has to go method though for a character like this, but to inhabit all these dimensions, I think he could do the job well. So a fascinating idea, a sprawling epic. But I think ultimately I'm going to go with Vulcan on this one. I think you've convinced me that the core of that emotional story is quite compelling, even beyond the spectacle and the sprawl of Apollo's life story.
Yeah. And I think the more I went into it, I actually think even the straight life story could be interesting when I realized it had the same story as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. And in which case, maybe that version could have been claymation.
There you go. Yeah,
claymation story of Vulcan. But I think the one that is inspired by Succession, Vanity Fair kind of takes it. So I think I'm going to go with Vulcan in that one as well. So
we still wind up with the 3-2.
We still another 3-2. Well, yeah, but, getting pretty close, but the winner is on points is Apollo.
Not a knockout blow, but no. On points, on rounds.
And do we want to affirm that? I don't see any real reason to go against it. Having somebody with that power over Z's at this point, seems
really
like a win.
It's the ace in the hole when it comes down to creating immediate value for us right now. I mean, considering what this guy pulled off in his first 10 minutes of life, right? I can only imagine his first 10 minutes of return to fame if we were to give him the golden goat at the end of the season. Well, we'll find out if we do.
Right.
But as for now, that's another episode in the books. That's episode 3. Our thanks once again to the great Andy Snow, Chicago-based DJ, AndySnow.dj, who is behind our theme music. Very excited to announce that the full version of the God versus God theme will be available on Spotify on February 11th. So a couple of weeks, likely after this episode appears, we will let you know when that's fully available. And front to back, it's a lovely piece of music. We only hear little clips of it in the context of the show, but really, really, really something. So thanks to Andy for that. We are now available all over the place: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. So get in there. Podbean, that too, sure, I guess. Yeah. So get in there, like, subscribe, leave a review if you like to. We'd love to incorporate your feedback in future episodes.
Definitely.
You can follow us on Twitter, God versus God Pod. Our website is godversusgod.com. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. There is no TikTok channel, Andrew. And I think the fact that our genre works really well in these discrete 90-minute chunks.
Probably that's about a half a TikTok.
That's right. we would probably break TikTok with just the sheer amount of ones and zeros. So we'll probably stay away from that one. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for another riveting episode. And for the rest of you, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time in episode 4, coming around the bend. God versus God.
All right, see ya.
See ya.